Now let's cross the Atlantic where all these wonderful and weird ideas begin, to the United States, to the eminently sensible and totally wonderful Rachel Blevins. Rachel, thanks for joining us. What's your take on that? Who do you think should be the next James Bond? Don't say me, because that would be partial.
I would think it's one of those cases where the internet may be trolling you a little bit. I apologize. I've got my puppy barking in the background. He, of course, did really, really good until I came on air. And now he decided that he wanted to join in the conversation as well.
It's a very exciting topic. Maybe he's got a point of view on it.
He does. All right, I'll give you another one here. I have actually never seen a single James Bond movie ever, so I don't know that I'm your one to pick the next one in this fight.
You're terribly young, you see, and so talented. No one could believe how young you are, so I'll forgive you for that. But the last one, the latest one, of Daniel Craig, is actually a pretty good movie. Let me move on the subject of movies, a much sadder story. I should make it clear, Alec Baldwin is a friend of mine, introduced by our mutual friends, Max and Stacey of RT. I like Alec Baldwin like a brother, and so the disaster, the tragedy that took place on the film set of Rust, I think the film's called, where the talented young woman cinematographer was accidentally shot dead, and the film's director actually mildly wounded, because the prop gun turned out to be a real gun, or at least to have a real bullet in it. It's an utter devastating tragedy, of course, firstly for the woman and her family, but also for Alec Baldwin, because it's quite clear to me that the media are out to get Alec Baldwin. They are desperately trying to blame him for this tragedy. What can you tell us about it, Rachel?
It is a tragedy, and I think that, this was one of those cases where it seems like everything just went wrong. And I know that, what Alec Baldwin has said was that he obviously did not know that there was a live round in the gun. It sounds like the assistant director handed him the gun, said, "You're good to go," and he didn't check it. And unfortunately, it is one of those reminders of the very basics of gun safety, which is that if you're handling a gun at all, you have got to check it. And you've got to assume that every gun has a live round in it, even if you have someone there telling you otherwise. And unfortunately, sometimes people don't quite realize it. They're not as on top of it as they should be. I think it is interesting to see all of the things that we've heard from this so far, in terms of the fact that the assistant director, Dave Halls, we're learning a little bit more about him being called out when he was on movie sets in the past. And really, he's had a number of complaints against him about unsafe environments, about not taking firearms and pyrotechnics seriously. And I mean, those are some of the most basic things. You want to make sure that your assistant director is on top of all of that, especially when they're in charge of people's lives, as we're seeing in this case. And he also, I guess, was involved with another film where Brandon Lee was shot and killed in a similar incident. And that's the first thing that everyone was comparing it to, saying, wait a second, didn't this happen with Brandon Lee back in the 90s? And so it is absolutely tragic that it has happened again. And I know that there have been reports that a number of union workers walked off the set earlier in the day because they said that the conditions weren't safe. And it just is a reminder of how seriously they all should be taking every aspect of that.
With Alec's support, by the way. He was a big union man, Alec Baldwin, and he absolutely, in fact, he encouraged them. He said, if you feel you have to, go on strike, because these studio bosses don't give a damn about you. He's one of the good guys, Alec Baldwin. I've got to tell you that. I know a lot of Trump supporters hate him because of his Saturday Night Live thing, but they should put that to one side. Alec Baldwin is a very fine actor. He's a proper blue-collar man, and I feel so badly about the whole thing. Now, look, staying on, if you like, entertainment issues, we ran a poll tonight which overwhelmingly supported Dave Chappelle. I wish the Netflix management would stand up as resolutely for him. What's your take on the move to cancel Dave Chappelle?
You know, I think it's almost comical in that sense that, you know, people are suddenly saying they're going to cancel Dave Chappelle. This man has been around. He's been in comedy for decades. And you know what? He makes fun of everyone. I mean, he makes fun of every race, every, you know, gender, everything. He has, that is kind of his shtick. That's why he's as popular as he is today, because he says things that kind of make people gasp, and he says things that are controversial. And it is interesting to see now this push against him. I know that there's a specific part of, you know, Netflix's staff that said that they were walking out because of it, because he was sitting there saying that gender is a fact and making other, you know, jokes about transgender people. But I think it kind of should bring all of us back to the place where this sort of woke culture that we've stepped into, and I know that it's much more in depth there in Scotland than even it is here in the United States. But I mean, that in and of itself is a privilege. Right, right. Exactly. That in and of itself is a privilege, to be able to sit there and say, oh, we're going to cancel this person, we're going to cancel that person. Well, at the end of the day, if you keep doing that, eventually everyone's going to be canceled, because the things that they said 5 years ago is not going to hold up to whatever the standard is of the current day. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, that people may have either changed their viewpoints as the years go on, or that they may have evolved, but it just means that this sort of new, you know, the fact that they thought that Dave Chappelle was going to get caught up in sort of this woke culture, it doesn't look like it's happening. In fact, I think the real tell sign here is that even though you've got the CEO of Netflix saying that he's apologizing for not handling it in the most sensitive way, well, they didn't take Dave Chappelle's comedy special down. Why? Because they knew that people were going to go and watch it and that it would make them money. So at the end of the day, yeah, they can act like they really care about all of these employees that were offended, but no, they just want those advertising dollars, and they know that they're going to keep getting it, especially now that everyone's talking about it.
It's a witch hunt, Rachel. It's the witches of Salem. People are charging around, looking around for targets that they can descend upon, not realizing perhaps that one day the mob might come for them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I know the stuff that you were talking about earlier in terms of, you know, changing our very language to say that a woman is not a woman. Well, as a woman, I mean, that's offensive in all of the ways that it possibly could be. I mean, granted, I have not been pregnant, I've not given birth, but from everyone that I've talked to, they can tell you that childbirth is one of the most painful experiences out there, and that is specific to women. So this new kind of culture that we're walking into, it's almost laughable because it's from people who claim that they care about human rights, yet at the same time, they're not sitting there talking about all of the humans who are being impacted by the entirety of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, we're not sitting here talking about what the United States has done to the Middle East, how the United States and its policies have completely devastated Yemen and all of the children there who have now created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. I mean, if you want to start talking about human rights, there's some specific areas that we could have a conversation on. And to sit here and to try to change our language and change our vocabulary, I mean, they've just missed it completely.
Don't let the pain put you off, Rachel, because I can confidently say you quickly forget about it. And tell your mother that if she lived in Scotland, we wouldn't be able to refer to her as your mother anymore. And it's worth making this point. Half of all the women in the world don't have access to a toilet, while people in the West are fixating about the right of a tiny number of people to use the women's toilets that mercifully we do have. Now, a quick segue to Donald Trump, who doesn't like toilet things, as we know. He's now created his own Twitter. I joined it today. I haven't tweeted on it yet. What's the prospect of success for that?
Oh my goodness. You know, it's funny because even some Trump supporters are saying they're not too happy with this website that he's created. And part of the reason is because, the market is out there to create something that is going to be a rival to the likes of Twitter and Facebook. And that's something we've all been waiting on Trump to do, to kind of follow through on whether or not he's going to create his own social media site. Well, he creates it, he calls it Truth Social, and he talks about how it's going to be a way for us to have free speech, to stand up to the tyranny of big tech, all that. But then if you look into the user agreement, you see that you can say whatever you want to, as long as you are not criticizing or offending the platform or its creator. So basically what he's done is he's created this website that, sure, it may be great. If you're a Trump supporter and you have nothing bad to say about him, that's awesome. But if you're the average person who is going to have some sort of criticism, some sort of complaint of Trump, or even the basic social media site that you're using, I mean, I criticize Twitter on Twitter all the time. That's just part of it. Then, of course, that's not going to be the platform for you. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is how long this website lasts, because we saw this happen with Parler, that like many, social media platforms, it is forced to use one of the bigger servers. It's forced to use, Amazon Web Services or the likes of that, because at the end of the day, Amazon runs basically our entire internet. And so then what happens if something happens on Trump's new Truth Social, something is said, and all of a sudden you've got the platform being kicked off? Well, there's not much they can do about that, as we've seen be the case with Parler. So how long it'll last, I don't know. We'll see.
Very interesting. I hadn't thought of that. How about President Biden? How's his polling numbers looking?
Yeah, his approval rating dropped down to 41%. And it seems like a lot of the frustration is around how he has dealt with the economy. And Americans are in a place right now, and I know this is something that you're seeing across the pond as well, where we're dealing with supply chain shortages, we're dealing with labor shortages, we're dealing with sort of the last year of policy really coming to a head in a way that is going to end up impacting the entire country. And I know that here we've been talking a lot about sort of those bottlenecks that we've seen in the supply chain. We've seen, dozens of ships waiting outside of ports in California. We've talked about the tens of thousands of truck drivers that are desperately needed. And a lot of people may just see that as a news story for now, but then what ends up happening is they're not getting their Christmas presents that they ordered. They're having to pay exponentially more in order to heat their homes in the winter. And so I think what you're seeing is sort of this building frustration with the Biden administration, and also with the fact that, they told Americans to go out and to vote blue no matter who, to vote Democrat. Now we've got a Democratic majority in the House, in the Senate, in the White House, and they're not even passing the measures that they put up that they said that were going to help the American people. So that frustration is there and definitely growing.
Is Trump still on the stump? Is he still doing these rallies?
He is. It looks like he's kind of going around and rallying for some of the Republican contenders, rather, that are looking at being elected right now. And we heard from Donald Trump Jr. recently. He made it sound like his dad was going to officially run. We still waiting for that announcement. We'll see how long he keeps us waiting.
I'm pretty sure he's going to run if his health holds up, and he looks pretty robust, at least by comparison to Joe Biden. So the midterms, will the Republicans be fielding Trump Republicans by and large, or will some of the Republicans be in the anti-Trump camp?
So that seems to be the ongoing battle right now, is that you've got kind of those specific Republicans that are going off of their Trump endorsement and that they are really holding on to. And then you've got the others, kind of like Liz Cheney, who are really going to hold on to being the opposite of Trump and trying to get support that way. And I think that kind of has the power to determine where the GOP wants to go with the upcoming presidential election. I mean, are they going to, which I think that they're going to give in and, let Trump be their candidate for another few years, because they know that he is going to be the one to bring in the most money, but it may give them a chance to kind of toy around and see what they're going to make it look like they're going to do.
Rachel Blevins, thanks as always for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.